Welcome back, guys. This is going to be the intro and the start of our pivot tables module. By the end of this video, you'll be able to be a pivot table expert and you'll be able to understand all of the ins and outs of the amazing feature inside of the Excel pivot tables, the big thing everyone wants to know. So today we'll go over pivot tables, more pivot tables, slicers, pivot charts, and more, the applications of these functions in the real world. And as always, hands-on. I'm using a Windows. If you have any questions during this hands-on tutorial, please reach out to me to Matthew, NGUYE 2023 at fau.edu. 20-minute video in this module, approximately, could be a little bit more. Let's get in some pivot table jokes before we get into the actual exercise. Why did the pivot table hire a comedian? Because it wanted to add pivoting humor to its data analysis, and it knew the comedian could table all the laughs. A pivot table walks into a bar and orders a beer, and it says, "Put me in the same tab, will ya?" Haha, very funny. Some pivot table memes, what gives people feelings of power, money, status using pivot tables. When you learn how to use pivot tables, it's true. It's true. And oh, you know pivot table, you must be very smart. All right, pivot table overview. Pivot tables are like magical tools for data exploration and analysis. They allow us to transform large amounts of information into clear and a concise format. Think of pivot tables as a structured framework that helps us unlock valuable insights and patterns. Values are like jewels in our pivot tables, representing numerical summaries like sums, counts, averages, and much more. With a simple drag and drop, we can create a custom layout that suits our analysis style and helps people like upper management and people that don't know how to use Excel properly. Alrighty, guys, let's drop into the workbook now. Okay, guys, so we are in the Excel workbook now, and as you can see, we'll start with the sample data tab so I can show you guys how to make pivot tables, and we'll move on to some a little bit more complex ones. So let's go to insert, select all the data, go to from table or range. Now we're going to make a pivot table. In here, you'll have a pop-up, and if this doesn't pop up, and let's say you're on the Home tab, you can just click here, go to Pivot Table Analyze, and show the field list. So let's say we want to look at the total sales by region. So we have this pop-up here that basically gives us an outlook of all of our fields. You can change the way that this looks if you click on this little settings button here. You can change it to this layout, or you can change it to this layout. I like this layout, so I'm going to keep it here. If you want to increase the size or move this, you can move this to, let's say, over here. I don't like that, so I'm going to open this back up, and I'm going to move it back. Move it to the side here. And do resize. Resize it quite larger. Okay, now I got the fields back up. Now let's add some analysis to this data. So let's say we want to look at the total sales by sales region. So what we'll do is we'll drag this sales region into the rows column. So now we see we have all of the regions here. Let's change this to region. Now let's add the total sales into the values portion of this. So now we got the sum of the total sales, but we'll change this just to total sales. We can change the number format by clicking on this. Number format, changing it to currency, click OK. So all of this will be in number format. That looks good. Now let's say we want to look at the product by sales region and their total sales. So let's throw the product here in the rows. So we know that this is what our outlook looks like for the total sales in this company. Now, let's say I want to look at the sales from each product as a percentage of total sales based on each region. So let's go to total sales. Let's go to total sales again. Let's drag this to the values column. So we'll have another total sales column. Now let's add this in by going to value field settings. Let's go to, I'm going to open this up so you guys can see this a little bit better. Let's do show value as. So we're going to change this from no calculation to percentage of grand total. We can also do it a percentage of parent row total. Let's actually do that so we see how much each product is selling in aggregate to its specific region. So let's do percentage of parent total. Let's go down here and let's click OK. So as we can see that the East region accounts for 29% of the grand total, and product A within the East region is selling 24% of that East region. Pretty nice here. Let's do a pivot chart here just based on the total sales by region. So I'm going to take out this this percentage column here, and again, if you want to change this to like percentage of ag sales, you can do that. But let's take this thing out, so we can just drag it off and it'll disappear. Now let's make a chart just based on the region in this case. So I'm going to also take out the product here, and we want to see total sales by region. So we can go to here and do pivot chart, and we can pull up a chart like this. Click OK, and we can see the total sales by region. Now let's say we only want to look at specific regions. You can click down here in this little filter option. Let's say we only want to look at the West and the East Coast. Compare those sales. This table will automatically update. And in the next lesson, we'll go over how to format tables and charts, and also change some of the axes here. But we can just change this to total sales by region. Let's change this filter back to select all. That looks great. That looks great. And that's kind of the basics of a pivot table. Let's look at some more complicated data. I'm going to just change this to sample pivot. Let's go over to the insurance data. So we have a bunch of insurance data here. We have our policy, a policy expired, location, state, region, insured value, construction, with the type of construction that we're doing insurance on. We have the business type, and we have earthquake, flood, or not. So let's again select the entire table, insert pivot table. As you can see, this table is a lot bigger. We'll go here again. We're just going to insert into a new worksheet. Don't worry about this stuff. We'll go over any of this stuff in a later video, especially the data model. So we'll click OK. We have our pivot table. Now let's say we want to look at the regions, and we want to look at the states in each region, and we want to look at the total insured value by state. We can just do this. Again, let's change these titles out to something more indicative. So we'll change this to insured value. Let's change this to region by state, so we can see the total insured value by state. Now you might see this blank down here. Most likely it's because we selected a blank row. So if we want to fix this, we can go up here to change data source, and we'll change the data source. So instead of the whole column here, we can just select the first cell, go over by clicking Control Shift arrow space, and then Control Shift down. We'll select the table of policies. As you see, it's already a table here. So we'll click OK, and it'll refresh. Again, let's format this as a number. So we'll go to number format. We'll go to currency, click OK. Now, this is great, and we kind of did something similar in the sales analysis. Now, let's maybe do only where the policy is not expired. So let's throw this into the filters panel up here, and now we can filter between the policies on specific times. So let's say we only want to look at specific policies. We can go here and we can select the ones that we don't want. In this case, I'm going to exit out of there. I'm going to throw this out. Okay, so let's actually take a look at the different types of policies that are in place. So we want to know if certain companies either did or did not have earthquake insurance. So let's take a look at that. So let's add the earthquake to the rows and the business type to the rows as well. And let's count the number of businesses in apartments, construction, education that did not have earthquake and that did. So we'll add another field to the values where we'll add the earthquake, and we'll count here. So we know that 244 of our clients in these sectors did not have earthquake insurance, and 256 did. Now let's say we want to filter by which ones had flood and which ones didn't. We can add the flood filters there. So we know that, again, this is the total, but let's say we want to look at which ones had flood insurance and also had earthquake insurance. So we'll click OK. So we'll see if they had flood insurance up here. There are 14 that had flood insurance but did not have earthquake insurance. Let's change this. Earthquake, yes, no. And we'll leave that column to count. So we know that out of our clients that did have flood insurance, 14 of them did not have earthquake insurance and 235 of them did. And this is the breakdown by each type of business. So let's say we want to add a chart that shows what breakdown of specific businesses had flood insurance and what breakdown of specific businesses did not have flood insurance. So let's actually swap these. So let's do business type, and then if they did or did not have any flood insurance, let's filter this by whether they did or did not have it. So we'll only add the ones that did. And let's do an analysis where we're going to click this, go to pivot chart, do a pie chart. So we know out of all of the customers that had earthquake insurance, this was the breakdown. So as you guys can see here, this is the breakdown of the different types of businesses that we had and whether or not they had flood insurance or not. Now, let's say we only want to look at the apartments, the construction, the office buildings, and the organizations. This will be the respective breakdown of how many these each had based on if they had earthquake insurance or not. I keep mixing earthquake and flood insurance. Apologies. So let's close this out. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff that we can do within pivot tables. And let's name this insurance pivot. And let's move on to the next table. Okay, guys. So let's say we had a list of projects and we want to know whether or not the project is in progress, completed, or on hold. This is a small amount of data here, but the analysis will be similar if you had a bigger range of data. So let's, again, add another pivot table here. So let's take a look at the different fields that we have here. Let's actually look at the project category. So we have the different departments here. We'll change this to departments. Let's look at the project status. So we know that out of these, we have those amount of projects. And let's also take a look at how many are in progress, complete, or on hold. So we know that in this analysis, only the finance and IT department have completed all of their projects. Now, let's say we want to take a look to see how projects are moving. So what we can do, again, let's add the project category. I'm going to actually, I'll just add it back to the rows. We'll change this to department. Okay, guys, so let's take a look at our project dates and see which ones are overdue and which ones are not. So what we can do here is let's drag the project status to the filters. In this case, let's only look at the ones that are in progress or on hold. So we know that these are the projects that are in progress or on hold. Now, in order to do an analysis here, let's add the end date to the values. Let's also add today's date to the values, and let's change both of these to just the sum. That'll give us the actual date. We'll change this to the sum. It'll give us the actual date. Let's take away this grand total column by right-clicking on the pivot table and take away subtotal. Oops, I already did that. Let's do remove grand total here. So as you guys can see, we have the projects that are overdue. Now let's just change this to end date and change this to today's date. So we want to look at how long these projects are overdue based on today. So we know that these projects are overdue. And let's take a look at how many days that they're overdue by. So what we can do is we can do pivot table analyze. We'll go to field settings, calculated field. We'll do overdue days. And we can go to this formula bar. We're going to insert the end date in here. So insert end date. We're also going to insert the today's date before that. So we'll insert the date here. We'll subtract this out so we get how many days overdue this project is. Click enter. So let's change these back to a number. So we'll do format cells, number, click OK. So let's change this to overdue days. Oops. Overdue days. Okay, looking pretty good. I'm going to trim off these extra colons here, these extra numbers here. So we know that these are the projects that are either in progress or on hold, and we know that these are how many days are overdue based on their end date. Okay, now that we did the overdue days, let's add another column that gives us how many days they had to complete this project. So let's add another custom field. Let's go to calculated field, days to complete. Let's do the end date minus the start date. Click OK. Again, let's change this to days given to complete. Let's change all these number formats to a normal number. Let's clean this up. Okay, now let's do a chart just on these values. I'm going to take out the end date and today's date. And let's see how overdue some of these dates are, these projects are. So let's do a bar chart. Click OK. So as you guys can see, based on our analysis, we know that there are some projects that are overdue by a lot of days, and these are the days that they were given to be completed. Now let's say we want to change the project status to only the ones that are in progress, not the ones that are on hold. So we'll filter that out. So we know that these are the projects that we need to follow up on in our firm to say, hey, we gave you guys X amount of days to complete, and this is how many days overdue based on the analysis we did on today's date. Again, another useful tool to do an analysis of your projects if you're a project manager or doing some sort of analytics to see how long on average you are overdue on project dates. And that. So let's change this to project pivot table. Click OK. And let's get into our last pivot table. And this is going to be our employee pivot table. So this has got a lot of data here, as you can see. Oops, I went all the way to the end. Let's do an analysis of our employees here. So I'm going to click this and click down. I'm going to go to insert. Again, pivot table. Going to do our employees, click OK. Let's change the title here so we don't have to change it again. Pivot table, add employees. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at the different departments. Okay, we got these departments. Let's look at the total annual salary by department. So we'll pull that into the values row. Let's change this again to a number format. We'll change it to currency in this case. Click OK. So this is going to be the total annual salary from each department. Now, let's say we want to add a column that shows us the annual salary as a percentage of the grand total. So we'll add another column called values. What we'll do is we'll take this out and add a percentage sign here. So percentage annual salary. Let's click of total. So we want to see which department is bringing in the most money. But what we'll do is we'll click right here and go to value field settings. We'll go to show value as, again, percentage of grand total. Okay, everything looks good there. Click OK. So as you guys see, these are the different departments and their percentages of the grand total. Now let's say we want to look at another chart here. Okay, now let's change this to department, and let's do a pivot chart on these numbers. Okay, now let's do a pie chart to see the percentages of our salaries by department. So let's add a pie chart here. We'll click OK. Let's click into the actual chart itself. Right click and go to add data labels. Click add data callouts. There we go. Now we have each department and their percentage of the entire organization's salaries that are paid. Now let's go back to our pivot table field list. We'll add our field list. Let's only filter by the job title. So let's say we only want to see the ones that are considered senior in this case. So let's go through this and look at the different roles. So director fits under our criteria. Manager fits under our criteria. Senior analyst, senior account representative, senior business partner, senior manager. And let's also add the vice president. So taking another quick look, looks like everything is good there. Let's also add business partner in this case. Click OK. Now all these values will update, and so will our table, our pivot table chart here. Now let's look at the timeline functionality inside of pivot table. So we're going to look at the insert timeline. What we can do here is let's do an analysis on the hire date and the average salary and the average bonus percentage. So as you guys can see here, it's just the sum in this case, but let's actually change this. So let's go to value field settings and change this to average. So average annual salary, average annual salary. And let's change this also to average bonus. Cool. Let's structure this data accordingly. So this will be numbers in this case, or currency. And let's change this to percentages. Okay. So what we can do here, guys, is let's take a look actually at more years. So as you guys can see, there are some date filters here. I'm going to clear the date filters so you see all the dates here. Now, kind of messy. Imagine if you got a bunch of dates, or even if you break it up by quarters in this case. If you expand this, you'll see that it's actually broken down into quarters, months in this case. So let's actually take this out, the months and the quarters in this case, and let's just look at the total year. So what we can do from here, guys, is let's go over to Pivot Table Analyze, and let's go over to the Insert Timeline. We'll do hire date, click OK. And with the timeline, you can actually look at months, quarters, years, and even days. Again, in this case, it's a little bit too specific to do that. So let's actually look at the years. All the years are selected in this case, but let's say we only want to look at the past 5 years. We can click out and it'll unselect everything. So let's look at the past 5 years. That's cool. We do the analysis there. And let's also look at the first 5 years. So as you can see, it's a nice way to slice and dice your data. Super efficient, super easy to use, and a very good way to summarize data quickly and efficiently. And as you can see, you can even break it down into months and whatnot. But that's a little bit too specific for this set of data since there's so many years here. So we'll only look at the years in this case. Okay, guys, so I'm going to clear some of this stuff out. Let's actually look at the slicer functionality inside of the pivot table. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an analysis again on the average salary. Okay, guys, so in this case for the slicer portion, let's actually add the ages to be the rows, and let's add the annual salary again for the values. Let's change this back to an average in this case. Let's not look at the total salary. Let's just look at the average. So we'll look at the average. We'll go do right click, value field settings, and do average. Click OK. Let's average annual salary. So in this case, we have all the ages, and we're looking at the average salary by age. We're going to change this to a currency again. Now with the slicer, it's Honestly, a great way, again, to slice and dice your data. Very cool pun there. Now, let's say we want to look at the ages in this case, but let's say we also want to look at ethnicity, and let's say we also want to look at department as well. So the slicers allow you to have this interface that allows you to select specific categories here. You can do a multi-select. So let's say we want to look at the accounting and engineering department for Black and Latino workers. You can do that. You can also add finance in here and it'll update those numbers. And let's say we want to look just at the Caucasians, ethnicity in this case. And then we can also do a multi-select here if we want to look at all of them in this case. A great way to slice and dice your data. Very easy, very quick. Allows you to filter over a large data set. And you can make a dashboard in this case to where you can show your management or decision makers, this is the data we have, these are the departments, and we want to look at the salary by age, and then we also want to break it down into the actual department and actual ethnicity of our workers. And you can add as many slicers as you want to kind of slice and dice the data even lower and lower and get to the desired outcome of your data analysis in this case. So many cool ways to do this inside of pivot tables, and I highly recommend you utilize the slicer and timeline functionality built in. That way you can do a comprehensive analysis on your data. We can continue going down the route of adding more fields in our pivot table. But for this exercise, I'm going to give you guys the freedom to look at this data and create a report. In your eyes, what might be the best way to do this in another Excel sheet and give an overview of the salaries based on the employee data. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this pivot table video. Hope you guys learned a lot about pivot tables. There is so much you can do within pivot tables inside of Excel. Stay tuned for the next video on the next lesson related to charts inside of Excel, the extensive charts, and then we'll finish off with a module on some useful tools outside of the basics of Excel and intermediate portions of Excel that I taught you. Hope you guys are enjoying these videos. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.